Hello everyone. Today's video is on a topic I've noticed a lot of people seem confused about. Hours of service are pretty straightforward, but while most drivers are familiar with them, I still see a lot of people making errors when they're explaining to them when they get questions asked. At the end of this video, please feel free to comment or ask questions, visit our Facebook page at There and Back Logistics, or send us a message via email at social@thereandbacklogistics.com. In this video we're going to discuss a couple of topics relevant to hours of service. So we have what are the hours of service, what types of hours of service are there, what types of exceptions are there, what is legal, how can I best use my hours of service, and what is different between the states. And I've got a quote there saying it's not about having time, it's about making time. It's actually something that's really relevant. If you budget your hours of service correctly, you can make your week easy and less stressful. If it's getting out of hand, then it can be very stressful, and you'll either have a short week and you'll have less pay, or you might end up getting stuck out somewhere that you don't want to be for one of your resets. So the reason I made this video is because you have confusion when there are questions like this out there, and you've got a quote there saying, "Hi, how many hours does the FMCSA require when going to school to get a certificate? I see most schools are 160 hours now or 4 weeks. I went to a really crappy school, 80 hours, $3,500 which I never received, and I never had any classroom time and hours of service, logbook and all that FMCSA training." So you got people who are going to these schools and they're not even getting told how to do their hours of service, how to keep an accurate and legal logbook. So, question there, do I have hours of service? Yes, but before I get into this, I want to say if you're within 100 air miles as a CDL driver or 150 air miles, it's different. You basically operate under a different rule, and this doesn't really apply for a lot of people. Mostly it's for like logging. But if you work within a 12-hour day, 100 air miles, and you go to the same home terminal every night, you can basically run without having an electronic logging device, and your hours of service is a little bit different. Most of your rules still apply. You're still going to have to do your 30, all that sort of thing, but your other rules are a little bit lax, and that's the same for non-CDL drivers. 150 air miles. If you pass through a state where you have to have a CDL for your vehicle, obviously this completely nulls it. Same thing with driving on the 14th hour of 7 consecutive days, 16th hour in 2 consecutive days. So you still need to say that you're going to be using this rule. If you're asked for your logs, you can't just say that you don't have logs, because it's a federal requirement that you have some form of logs. But if you're using this rule, you don't have to have logs with you because you're using an exemption. So this is just to get this out of the way. It's 150 or 150 exemption. Otherwise, hours of service are the way that you can legally operate a commercial vehicle each day and each week. So the week is either a maximum of 60 hours over 7 consecutive days or 70 hours over 8 consecutive days. Now that means that you, over the course of 7 days, can run up to 60 hours before you have to reset, or 70 hours over 8 days. It doesn't mean you have to run for 7 days. It doesn't mean that you have to do a Monday to Sunday. It can be it can be Wednesday to Tuesday for that 7 days. And between that Wednesday and Tuesday, you can run up to 60 hours before you have to take a reset. So during those 60 hours, during those 7 days, you have 14 hours of on duty per day, and of that you can do 11 hours of driving. And that means that you can do 5 hours of driving and 3 hours of on duty, and that's your day. And you don't have to use the full 14, you don't have to use the full 11. You can't go over your 11, you can't go over your 14 without an exception. What it also means is if you're using on duty time, then that's on duty time. If you're using driving time, then that also counts against your on duty time, because your on duty is all of your work time. So basically, if you're working, that's how that works. Minimum of 10 hours off duty or on sleeper berth between the on duty work days. Minimum of 34 hours off or in sleeper berth to restart the work week and refresh the available hours. To clarify, minimum of 34 hours, meaning that you can have 2 days off, 3 days off, whatever. You don't have to wait until your 60 hours is completely up or your 70 hours isn't completely up. You could work 50 hours of those and then reset. You could work a day and then reset if that was how things worked. Basically, just by taking this reset, it completely refreshes your hours and makes it so that you go back up to your maximum before you start again. Then the other thing I've got on here, minimum of 30 minutes off duty or sleeper berth break every 8 hours of on duty or driving. That's an FMCSA law, making sure that you're not driving tired, making sure that you have the opportunity to get out, kick the tires a little bit, make sure that you haven't picked anything up. So that's just another safety thing. That 30 minutes I'll get into because that is actually kind of a convoluted deal. And then for the exceptions, we've got a 16-hour conditional exception, which you can use once per work week, which is basically once every 30 for reset. A safe haven, which applies to hazmat only, which isn't really anything that kind of helps. It kind of actually limits hazmat drivers on what they can do. If you've got a division 1.1, 1.2 or 1.3 product on board, it means that you have to basically take your resets in a place that's safe rather than being able to just pull off the side of the road and do it. The adverse driving conditions exception, that means that if you were in a situation where you left and everything was fine, and then in the course of you driving, things got really bad, there is an exception there that makes it so that you can get a little bit of extra time. It's extending the drive time by 2 hours based on weather conditions, but they have to have been not present or not expected when you were dispatched on the run. So a snowstorm blowing in, for example, if it wasn't on the schedule, if it wasn't, predicted by the weather, that's something that would count in that case. If it was, you're driving through the snow, but it was already really bad when you left, it kind of doesn't apply. So it gets a little bit dicey there. And then you've got violations, which can incur penalties ranging up to $11,000 per violation. 11,000 is, I think, the max. But if you get cited on more than one thing, that's not going to stop them from, citing you 5 or 6 times. And that can get really expensive really quick. So the next thing I've got here, another example of what I was talking about. This guy says a few questions. So number 1, does your pre-trip, fueling, load and unload time count against your 70, or is it actually 70 hours of driving? So I've got on here, yes. All that counts against your total time for the day and for the week, but it doesn't count against your driving time. Pre-trip, fueling, load and unload, that's not driving. You're not physically moving the truck down the road. That's on duty, out and about, doing things that are your work time. Like I said there, on duty is all your work time, and it can be a serious violation if you're caught falsifying your logs to show you're on duty instead of driving, or off duty instead of on duty. Number 2, if you're tired, regardless of reason, and take a nap to stay safe, are you just screwed out of that time no matter what? So what I say there is, if you need to nap but are sleeping in the truck, then log that as sleeper berth. This counts against your 14 available hours for the day, but will not count against your total on-duty hours for the week. Basically, unless you're going to do a full reset, your clock will keep ticking, but at the end of the day, when it goes back and it looks at what you ran for that day, that time counts as off-duty time, so it doesn't count against your on-duty, it just kind of screws you for the day a little bit. And then number 3, when you all think about getting sick on the road, ride it out in the cab. I'm not talking about something that warrants hospital, I mean a bad cold, flu, etc. And like I say here, if you're not in a state to drive safely, contact dispatch or whoever's in charge of the run that you're on and explain the situation. The mandatory 30-minute break is in place to increase road safety, and inability to see, drive or operate equipment safely falls under the same concern. Basically, you don't want to be driving down the road doing 50 and you sit there and you have a really bad, you can't see, or you're sneezing really bad, and in that time where you're sneezing really bad you plow into the back of somebody. It's, I'm not going to say that you're not supposed to drive, because obviously you're going to make money, but at the same time you got to be careful, because it's going to cost you a whole bunch of money if your insurance goes up. So then the next thing I've got on here is the 67 hours of service example. Now if you just take a minute to look at this, what I've got here, and I'll explain it line by line. Got an example of a driver. On Sunday, he's got 0 hours used. He's got 60 of his total remaining. That basically means that he's starting with a fresh clock. Then on Monday he uses 10 hours, it goes down to 50. Tuesday he uses 8 hours, goes down to 42. Wednesday 14 down to 28. Thursday 11 to 17. Friday uses 10 hours, goes down to 11. Saturday uses 8 hours and it goes down to 3. Now that's total on duty. That's including his driving time. That's including his, fueling, loading, offloading, pre-trip, post-trip. All of that is his used hours. It doesn't include his 30-minute breaks. It doesn't include any of the other time that he logged as sleeper berth or off duty. But he gets to Saturday and he's got 3 hours left. And then on Sunday, he doesn't do anything, and he's still got 3 hours left because he's on a 7-day rotation. And since he started his workday on Monday, it goes from Monday to Sunday. So then we get to Monday again, and he uses 8 hours. But because he took a 34 reset on Sunday, his hours had gone back up to 60, and so it'll take 8 hours off the 60 instead of the 52. And then on Tuesday he does a full 14, and that goes from 52 down to 38. This is a standard example. What I'll do in the future is I'll sit there and I'll show you an example of how to roll the hours and how some people are able to work 7 days a week, or 7 days on their 7 or 8 days on their 8. And here's another example in the 70 and 8 example. Sunday he starts with 70 and then it goes down. Monday at 61, Tuesday at 54, 46, 37, 28, 21, 14, 7. Okay? So that's 8 days because it's going not from Monday to Sunday but Monday to Monday. He goes down to 7. And then you get to Tuesday and then he doesn't use anything and he's still at 7. And then Wednesday he goes and uses 11 and is at 59, and that's because on that Tuesday he did his reset. But because he's an 8-day driver, if he'd have been a 7-day driver and doing this, for example, if he got to the Monday, then his hours would have started to roll, and I'll go into that in more detail. But this is just another example of how a 70 and 8 driver would look, and it has its benefits. It's how you're running basically. So here's the 30-minute break that I was talking about. First and foremost, it's a 30-minute break. It doesn't have to be more than 30 minutes, but it can't be less, and you can't split it between multiple off-duty stops. It has to be a single 30-minute block or it doesn't count. Off-duty and sleeper berth both work, but you can't be driving, you can't be on duty, or at least at the moment. I'll talk about that in another video. It has to be done after 8 hours of driving or on duty, and the recommendation is that if you're doing a 14-hour day, do it somewhere between the hours of 4 and 8. You're mandated to take it after 8 hours, but you don't want to do it too early. If you drive for 2 hours and then take your 30, you're going to have to take another 30 around the 10th hour, and that's going to affect your 14 because your 14 doesn't get paused when you're taking your off-duty 30-minute breaks. So instead of having a 30-minute break during your day, you've got an hour at that point. If you start your clock at 8 a.m, you're supposed to still be off duty after 14 hours, so you're going to be off at 10 o'clock at the latest. So your off duty time doesn't affect your hours for the day, it affects the total that you'll have to work for the week, if that makes sense. Essentially, being on duty at any time during your workday, you're not saving yourself hours for that day, but you're saving it for later in the week if you want to extend your ability to work more. So, I've got here a summary based on what we've just talked about. Going to trucking school this weekend, and I just wanted to get a head start on understanding the hours of service. I know we have a 14-hour day if we decide to do over the road with an 11-hour maximum drive time, only with a mandatory 10-hour off-duty time. If we drive 8 hours or more, it's mandatory to take a 30-minute break. So my question is, since we're on duty for the 11 hours drive time, what happens with the other 3 hours during the day? Would that 3 hours be considered on duty or off duty? Well, my answer there is, if you're just driving, then you have an 11-hour day, basically. But if you're doing things like you have a 2-hour load time and a 2-hour offload time, then that's 4 hours into your 10, in your 14, and it only gives you 10 hours of driving. So that's why you have that little bit of flex there, is so that if you do have a delay for whatever reason, I mean, I'm pretty sure technically any of your breakdown stuff could probably be logged as on duty as well, so that would also count. He also goes on to say, also, I know that we can use a sleeper berth for a 10-hour off-duty period. For example, 8 hours sleeping one period, then 2 hours sleeping another period will count towards a 10-hour restart. What he's talking about there is the 8-2 split. I'll talk about that in a sec. I know for on duty you can do work-related tasks such as paperwork, load and offload, trip, pre-trip, but as for off duty, that's our sleepy time. I also noticed that they took away 2 consecutive periods of 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. for the 34-hour reset. I kind of get the hours of service, but I'm still pretty confused. Please explain. So he has an idea of how the hours of service works, and he still doesn't know what he's talking about. Is basically how this sums up. It's got so many intricacies that it doesn't really make sense. What I've got there is a note at the bottom. The 2 consecutive periods of 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. for the 34-hour reset, that was a rule which was abolished because it didn't explicitly identify a net benefit on driver operations, safety, fatigue, and health. The other one was a rule that basically limited you to one 34-hour reset every 168 hours. That also didn't really have a benefit on the driver as far as they could tell, so they got rid of that one as well. So now it's just a straight 34-hour reset anytime. As long as it's 34 hours, reset your clock and you can do it as many times a week as you want. So in this one, this is what I was talking about with the 8-2 split. As you can see there, we've got a driver in deep distress, and there's a guy there with There and Back Logistics tattooed across his forehead, and he's trying to give him some encouragement and some support, because the 8-2 split, well, I basically found a whole bunch of stuff saying just don't use it. Drivers using a sleeper berth must take at least 8 hours in the sleeper berth and may split the sleeper berth time into 2 periods, provided neither is less than 2 hours. That is a gross simplification. Basically, if you know how to do the 8-2 split and you know how to do it legally, it's legal if you're doing it correctly. My thing here is, if you're already sleeping for 8 hours, if you can, just take the rest of your 10 and reset your clock entirely. I'll cover it in more detail. It's just not something that I can see as having kind of a net benefit for most drivers. Like maybe like 5% of drivers will ever see a situation where it's useful. So the last thing I'm really going to cover here is state boundaries. So after that really depressing one, I've got this really uplifting, very pretty one here. Basically, traveling within the USA does not change the hours of service rules. It's federal, so it doesn't matter whether, Alabama says that you can do a 16-hour day and it's an 18-hour exemption. It doesn't matter. Alabama's wrong. It's 14 with 11 hours of driving nationwide. It's a federal mandate, which means that, anytime that you basically do it wrong, it's, a federal issue rather than just a state issue. Your hours of service are always based on the hours of the time zone from which you started. That means that if you start heading in a direction, you're not going to gain or lose your hours of service. You have 70 hours flat. You obviously have to worry about things like your delivery time if you cross a time zone, but you're not going to travel from Washington to the Dakotas, and because of the way that the time zone works, you're going to lose 2 or so hours on your hours of service. And then the other thing here, the 100 and 150 exemptions do cross the state lines. So if you're in Vancouver, in Washington, 100 miles, you go over into Portland, that still counts, as long as you're able to get back within the time limit and as long as you don't exceed that radius. So hopefully some of this information was helpful. I probably have a lot of stuff that I can go into in more detail, but I kind of wanted to just give an overview here. I'll go into more detail on things like the 8-2 split, the rolling your hours over the 7 days or the 8 days. If there are any questions, let us know. I can roll them into the next video as a follow-up and just cover anything that wasn't actually covered before. And I've got on there our website, thereandbacklogistics.com, our email, social at thereandbacklogistics.com, and our Facebook page, facebook.com/thereandbacklogistics. If you get a hold of us on any of those, we'll get right back to you. And hopefully this helped you guys. And like I said, talk to you soon.